Forging IT security experts. Secure Ninja.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Secure Ninja. I'm John Miller. This week we're going to be talking about the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. It was a bill that's been recommended as of Valentine's Day, actually, February 14th of this year. And joining me on the show to discuss the Cybersecurity Act is the CTO of Secure Ninja, Ross Leo. How are you doing, Ross?
I'm doing great, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for joining me. So, basically, just to give the big umbrella of what this act is trying to legislate, is trying to make sure that industries that the Department of Homeland Security has decided are of vital importance to the security of the United States, financial security, etc., such as power and phone companies, water treatment plants, wireless providers, and there's actually 17 different sectors in the United States that have been deemed of vital importance by the Department of Homeland Security, trying to get those different companies and organizations to secure their data and force them to secure the data. So it's kind of something that has cropped up every probably few months, don't you think, Ross? As different threats seem to come into play from different foreign governments and everything. It's something that is been on the radar screen for a long time, but no one's really been able to push any legislation through to get that going. Isn't that the case?
Well, this bill, first off, you're absolutely right. This is something that does happen every few months. Something hits the news about, China hacked Amazon, or Alaska hacked Google, or something like that, to suddenly make everybody up in arms about this. So yeah, it frequently inflames the news and everybody gets all excited, and then it gets its 15 minutes of fame on the front page, and then it goes to page 3, and then the middle, and then somewhere buried on page 24 down at the bottom. And it's not that there's anything wrong or strange about that. That's really just the way it works. But your point about this being largely a bill about the Department of Homeland Security and the protection of the 17 sectors is true. That's a great deal of what is in this bill. And it has taken them at least 5 years to get to this point with this. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of wrangling, a lot of backroom dealing, the usual Washington thing.
Of course.
In trying to decide what they need to protect, what they would like to protect, how much of a nanny state they want to be, how much they can actually afford, all of those various issues. When it comes to giving the Department of Homeland Security jurisdiction over a lot of the critical infrastructure, one of the biggest problems, and you kind of alluded to it a bit, was a lot of the structure that makes up the power and the telephone and several other of the 17 are in the hands of private owner-operators. They're not under government control, meaning that the government cannot mandate, do this, do that, do this, do that, and you'll do it because I say so, because I'm the owner and I'm the boss of you, so to speak. You have a lot of people that are operating consortium, that are private concerns, corporations, that own these things. And the government, more or less, up until now at least, has had to go begging to them, you play a really important role in all this, could you please do a little bit more? And their common thing is, sure, we'll do that. And we'll raise our rates and people will pay more. Mm-hmm. Unless, of course, Mr. Government, you want to subsidize it and pay for it. And so these are the issues that the government has been struggling with, and they're not simple. They're not one-dimensional. They are difficult issues. And the fact that they've gotten to this point and really stuck to it, now I'm not saying that makes the bill a perfect piece of work. No bill ever is. But the fact that they have stuck with this for 5 years at least, and they've gotten to this point, I think is a very creditable thing at least. And, of course, we'll see what happens from here.
Yeah, if we go to look at my computer here. If we go to Senate.gov, you can actually see the Department of Homeland Security has been saying that they've been studying this since the late 1990s, and then obviously as of September 11th, 2001, that was pushed into the mainstream consciousness, and so yeah, it's definitely been something that's been, let's say, brewing for a long time.
Well, it has been, and it's never been far from anybody's mind, especially those in Washington, that the threat of people compromising us is really not one that boils down to open warfare on American soil. The kind of target that America is, if a foreign enemy, or a domestic enemy for that matter, should happen to decide that they want to take down a significant part of America, attacking our critical infrastructure would be one of the best ways to do it. There was once upon a time a story that there were about 3 to 5 points of, well, attack, if you want, in a section of the United States, that if a smart person who knew this particular area and knew the kinds of things that he'd have to do, he could really wipe out, well, that is to say, darken, an extremely large section of the United States. And that was because the design of the system was not one of self-defense. It was designed to be used, designed to meet a population's needs. It was not designed to be robust and strong as though it had to fend off, the Visigoths, the electronic Visigoths from attacking. That is almost never in the minds of people that design and build these things. What if somebody's going to attack? Well, they just don't think about it that way. So somebody like DHS has had to move in and say, well, okay, now we have to go back and think about this because, as you pointed out, on September 11th of 2001, we got hit very, very hard, and it really raised the national consciousness to the point that now, okay, now the bad thing has happened, the really, really bad thing that everybody told us was going to happen eventually, and now we've got to do something about it. No more talk, we've got to have some action. And so that's what they're trying to do. And like I said before, this is not an easy thing to do. Security is something everybody and every nation wants. Honestly, they're not always willing to pay for what it is they think they need, partly because they don't know exactly what they need, but partly because they think that if they get everything that they do need, what they're going to be is a police state. And oftentimes that's proven to be true. So even in the minds, even in the psychology of the people, there's the struggle to come to a balance about how much is enough, what is going to be effective, what's going to stop it, because we'd love to live in a world without danger, but this being a real world, that just simply is not going to happen, and we're going to have to constantly be on our guard. Not just America, everybody. We all have the same issues, and a lot of folks outside of this country seem to forget that. They would do well to remember it as well.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Well, you've been reading through the bill, and I can actually bring it up here. It's 205 pages. Is there anything that has kind of stood out as you've been going through it?
Well, one of the things that when I read these sorts of things, I always look for, okay, who are we targeting and what are we really trying to do? Much has been made of this bill heralding its arrival. And while I think that this is a very, very good, very important step, it is only a step. If we use the HIPAA law, for example, when it was passed, it was 14 years before we modified it, and in that 14 years, we found out that, well, we didn't write it perfectly, so we had to change it. Few laws are ever perfect the first shot out of the box, and this one won't be any different. There's going to be a lot of bumps and bruises. There are going to be a lot of protests. Bills like this, when it becomes law, many people will test it by suing to get certain pieces of it thrown out or rewritten. That happens in every case. What I look for is I look for things like that, because this law, being a federal law, represents a national minimum standard that everybody will have to meet. and all the critical infrastructure operators are going to have to meet whatever the compliance requirements are. This is going to be battled in a number of different ways. It's going to be battled because they're going to claim that if we have to do all this, it's going to raise the cost of delivering a kilowatt of power, or a minute of phone service, or long distance is going to become more costly. That is typically the fallback they always have. It's not that they're wrong, but it's a dodge. They all know we need to do this. I have several friends who work in many different utilities like this, and that's just one of the areas. That's always the fallback. Well, it's going to cost us more. And instead of the government saying, well, if it's going to cost us more, let's see how creative we can get in meeting the goal, meeting the objective, meeting the standard of performance that we've set, let's see how creative we can get in doing that and actually meet it without incurring more cost than is absolutely necessary. Because part of it is people are stuck in this rut of, well, we always have to do this because this has always worked, and they're rarely creative because they don't want to be. It's not that they can't be, they don't want to be. It's too hard. They have to think too much. This bill is going to cause people to have to do that. It's not going to be rewritten. It's going to stand the way it is, but it's going to be spaced out over time. The other thing I look for in a bill like this is the escape clauses. And by escape clause, I mean that the government will say, you have to do this, except under these circumstances, or this must be achieved, except if you run into this problem over here, then you can waive that. The bills have gotten stronger over time, but there's still a lot of that. I'm still looking for specific ones in this particular bill, ones that I have come to expect will be there. Because rather than create a police state, rather than nationalize the power industry or the telephone industry or any of those sorts of actions, which are incredibly unpalatable to Americans. That's on the way to communism, is what that is.
Right.
So there's nothing to be gained by doing that. But short of doing that, they have to get something better. They have to get more into it. And it's going to be a stepwise process because it will be more expensive. It is going to be a change in the way that they think. But there isn't any person, any corporation, any operation that's covered by this bill that isn't aware that these issues exist. They all do. They have working groups, industry working groups and panels that meet on a regular basis. They talk through these things, and they get in there and they wring their hands and they hold their head and they say, gosh, guys, what can we do? Well, we can only do what we can do. So there's been a lot of struggles, and maybe this bill, maybe it will give some backing to the efforts that a lot of these people have made. It may mean that a kilowatt of power is more expensive. But, all of that aside, the one thing that people really need to remember is the people that wrote this are not the bad guy. The people that they wrote this bill to protect us against is the bad guy. And the bad guy doesn't think like us because he's reading this bill too.
Right, yeah, I think that probably often gets overlooked.
Well, if you don't think like a bad guy, you can't appreciate what they do. I do a lot of consulting and a lot of training. One of the things that I tell my class every single time is the fact that you people are here, you are the good guys. You don't think like a bad guy. But the problem is you have to think like the bad guy if you are going to defeat the bad guy. Because he has a very distinct advantage over you. It's not that he's smarter. It's not that he has better technology. It's not that he has state sponsorship, although in some cases some of them do. It's the fact that you, in your normal job as a good guy, you've got 1,000 things you have to worry about through the course of a day or a week. The bad guy has only one thing to worry about, and that is how he can successfully attack and compromise you. And it is sort of a different slant on the old forest and trees thing. But the fact is, he only has one thing to worry about, and that's how he can compromise you. Whereas You have disaster recovery plan tests you have to worry about. You've got documentation you have to produce. You've got your boss writing you about a project that you're late on. A million things. And that is the biggest advantage that he has over you, that and the fact that he's a bad guy, and that's what he thinks about all the time. And that's the one thing that this bill will never be able to change. No bill will.
Well, let's kind of go back to HIPAA, and you've been working in and consulting for the healthcare industry for a long time, and as you said, it was 14 years before it was rewritten, and so you have a lot of practical knowledge and experience in how all of this works. What were some of the main challenges that you encountered having to embrace HIPAA?
Well, I'll give you an example, a very pertinent example of what I was describing before about how it's a stepwise process and how you have to take it kind of slow at times. Okay. When HIPAA was first written, it was very clear to the authors that the electronic move towards electronic healthcare information, what we call protected health information, that move was going to require that we protect that information when it's at rest on a drive or in a laptop or something of that kind, or when it's moving through a network, presumably across the internet. It's a lot of the same kind of thing that we did for years. Before that, this was 1997, when HIPAA became active. It was the same kind of thing we were doing in e-commerce well before that, and we've had electronic means to protect information in transit as well as at rest on drives. But because this was something new to healthcare, the challenge was, how do we get them to do it? Because they haven't been doing it. Because it drives up the cost of healthcare. It's back to that same argument I gave you before. So the issue was, they had to tell healthcare that you have to protect it at rest and in transit. In the first iteration of the bill, they simply said you have to protect it. They didn't really specify anything. One of the things that bills have to be is they have to be technologically agnostic, and that means they can't tell you you have to use a checkpoint firewall for this or a Norton antivirus for that. They have to be vendor independent as well. So
right, it's just the result that needs to be met.
That's what the law is really after, which is good because it leaves you, the enterprise, open and gives you the ability to be creative to meet a particular standard without pinning you into having to do certain things. Well, what was found in the 14 years between the HITECH Act, passed in 2009, and the original HIPAA law passed in 96, was they found that by being that nebulous, they left people very much in the lurch about what to do. So they had to rewrite it a little differently. But once again, you have to use, gobbledygook, if you will. Excuse me. To be able to tell people what to do. So they had to word it in a particular way, and in the law it says you have to render it in a certain way. It has to be unusable, unreadable, or indecipherable. Those of us in security know perfectly well that there's really only one way to do that, and that's to encrypt. Well, the CIO at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid finally decided he'd had enough of this, so he wrote a memo, and he told everybody that you're going to do the following. You're going to encrypt it, and you're going to encrypt it in this way because they're bound by government standards, so they had particular ones that they had to use. They didn't specify a product, but they specified a specific instrumentality, if you will, that had to be used to protect it. So all of these convolutions that they had to go through, it finally got done. But it took another 2 years before that finally got done by clearing away all of the, well, all of the clutter of words that sort of clouded the issue. And we finally got down to what we're going to do.
Right.
We finally got some solid direction. And this is the problem with security. When we get direction, it's you can do this or you can do that. You can do this or you can do that. And they're so desperate to try to write laws the proper way of writing laws that as a friend of mine once said, they let perfect be the enemy of good enough. That there are many times that they could just come right out and say what they need, because history has shown that eventually that's exactly how it ends up, rather than go through all of these hoops of fire to try to write the law with the correct language, holding their mouth the right way, smiling with the proper amount of teeth, you know, the details of all this that have nothing to do with the content.
Sure.
That when they do that, they make it more difficult to implement, because we're all trying to do the right thing according to the law, but we're not getting the job done because we're too busy observing the law and not actually paying attention to the real threat. It gets lost in the sauce someplace. And that, I think, is the biggest tragedy. We really lose sight of what we're trying to achieve because we're just trying to follow the proper forms and make sure that we get all that right, so that we'll pass an audit, never mind the fact that we're really not secure after all. So that is also the kind of thing that I'm looking for in this bill. And so far I have some particular sections that I'm very suspicious about that will fall into that. But I haven't really decided what I really haven't decided ultimately what I think. I've got to read the rest of the 205 pages. So I'm about halfway through.
Are you talking about basically worrying that the legislation is going to create the illusion of security?
I am very worried about that, yes.
Yeah.
I'm very worried about that. Because, well, as I had mentioned before, we set a bunch of standards, we comply with the standards, we're secure. Poof. Magically, it's all done. Somebody comes in, performs an audit, poof, we comply, we've got 100% on the audit, we're done, we're secure. The very next day, somebody comes in, hacks the system.
Yeah, because again, they're completely familiar with the standards, and so they will know how to, or be able to find ways to get around them.
That's exactly right, and that's what, and I say bad guys in a generic sense.
Absolutely.
There is no mystery about the fact that there are state-sponsored, and I don't really want to use the term hacker because that's too cliche. That doesn't really say what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because these people are looking for, they're not looking for military secrets as I understand it. As I go through and read and have chats with friends of mine in various places, what the people are doing that are doing this from foreign countries coming here to do it, and it should surprise no one that America is the prominent target. We're not the only one in the world. I'm sure that India and Pakistan, for example, hack each other back and forth as kind of their constant, jostling match that they go through. There are countries that have love-hate relationships with each other. But we should be and are the biggest target, because this is where all the technology is. This is where everybody comes to make $1 million and go back and be a hero in their own country. What they're coming to America for is they're coming and they're hacking our systems to learn how they're put together, to obtain intellectual property, trade patents, trade secrets, copyrights. They're trying to test our defenses. They're not necessarily interested in bringing us down. What they're interested in is they're trying to leapfrog, and I'm not saying that this is the only thing that they're after. They have a wide range of purposes, I'm sure. But they're trying to bring themselves forward in time. Here's a very relevant example. It's an astounding and rapid growth that China has gone through in the past 20 years. China shows clearly that a totalitarian type of government, and this isn't the classic one, this is one that's a little bit more lenient because these guys appear to have some brains, but they are showing that a totalitarian government and a capitalist economy work extremely well together as long as the capitalists under the government mind their business and do as they're told. The government lets them make all the money they want to. But what this has produced is state-sponsored hacking, because what it's allowed them to do is it's allowed them to electronically come west, obtain tons of information, tons of intellectual property that they can make use of in their home country to overcome the unbelievable amount of ill effects of the Cultural Revolution inflicted on the nation by Mao. And they've said so about this themselves. But the reason why this is so important to China, as it is to Russia, as it is to all of the other countries that do this, and the larger ones all do it, and you should make no mistake about the fact that they do, because they do. What it does is it saves them billions upon billions of dollars in time and development, so that if you have a secret design for something, a widget, a memory chip or something, and it took you 10 years to develop it at the cost of $100 million for 10 years, so that's $1 billion. If I can steal the design, and I know where to buy the machines that can build it, I can start building the very same chip that it cost you $1 billion to develop over 10 years. I can start producing those things en masse this year at a cost of 1% of all of that. So I don't have $1 billion I have to pay back. All I have to do is just start churning them out, and I'm going to be making money hand over fist. The economics are very much in favor of the hacker who is seeking this particular objective, because they don't have to go through all that. They can get it all done. They can start doing it. They can blow us away with manufacturing 1 billion of these chips in the same time it takes us to manufacture 1 million. And when it comes to things like that, this theft of intellectual property, which is what they're largely doing, is going to pay them enormous economic dividends. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it at all. And it's a cost to us to have to defend against that. But this is what they're after, and this is what they're gathering, to the tune of about $60 billion a year in lost intellectual property. And they're just a part of that. They're a large part of it, but they're just a part of it.
What do you feel about Lieberman, as he introduced the bill, Senator Lieberman? He introduced a statistic given by McAfee.
Last year, the computer security firm McAfee conducted a study of 70 specific instances of data theft and then issued a report on those instances, and they included 13 defense contractors, 6 industrial plants, and 8 American and Canadian government networks. Based on that report, the former Vice President of McAfee, Dmitry Alperovich, issued this warning. I am convinced, he wrote, that every company in every conceivable industry with significant size and valuable intellectual property and trade secrets has been compromised, or will be shortly, with the great majority of the victims rarely discovering the intrusion or its impact. In fact, Alperovich concluded, I divide the entire set of Fortune Global 2000 firms into 2 categories: those that know they've been compromised and those that don't yet know.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure that that's true. But I would like to see what the definition of compromise is in their particular study.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, that can show that it's very much in the wording, and yeah, you don't know exactly what standards they're going by. So, but I mean, it is, if we just go on a general, on general terms, is every company out there vulnerable?
Every company is, to a greater or lesser extent, vulnerable, specifically if they are connected to the internet. And it's because the internet, which Steve Jobs lovingly called the World Wide Web back in the 80s sometimes, I think, it is because of that every company is vulnerable. In the days when we had no worldwide network connecting anybody, they weren't vulnerable to anything because they weren't susceptible to anything coming in from the outside except from a known, clearly and well-defined point, one of their own usually. One of the first networks I worked on, it had 205,000 stations. It had a couple of hundred locations around the world, but it was all private, all private. And we had email and everything else. Not a single virus ever entered it because it wasn't open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
But the internet itself is simply a conveyance. It is not a thing that is evil unto itself, of course. It is simply a way of getting things from point A to point B. But it helps to keep in mind that the things that the bad guys use against us are oftentimes tools that the designer designed, and let's take a very simple one, the ping of death. By simply massaging a few parameters, they take a very standard, very widely used normal diagnostic tool for network analysis, and they turn it into a weapon. That's because the designers never thought about that. That's because they're the good guys.
Right.
The bad guy played with it a bit. But when people can do that, and they can take a tool like that, a ping, that in itself is hostile, no system will recognize it because it's still just a ping to them. When this is the kind of weapons vector that they can use, it's the kind of thing that you wonder what you can do to protect yourself. It's not until the bad thing happens, the ping of death the very first time, that somebody goes, oh wow, I didn't know that anybody could do that. Now we have a way of figuring out how to fix it. But that doesn't say much for how proactive we can be, because many times it does take the bad thing to happen first and then for us to react to it to figure out how to prevent the bad thing from happening again. And that hasn't changed. Like I say, I've been in this business 33 years. I have yet to see that really change. This cybersecurity bill is not going to direct that change. It's going to bolster some things. It's going to give us a chance to be better in our response. It's going to encourage people to do the right thing more often than they're doing today, apparently. But it's not going to fix the basic problem, and that is we are simply not the bad guys, and we don't think like they do. If you think about this, and I don't mean to belabor this topic, but it comes down to something very, very, very simple. No matter what kind of a security system you develop, the criminal mind is going to find a way around it. That's because that's what they do. The criminals that never get caught, the criminals that are very effective, that end up billionaires living on a South Pacific island, free from anybody, the ones who are most successful, they're the ones who did it well and never got caught for doing it. The criminal mind is always going to succeed at this sort of thing. And we will succeed in stopping them the second and third time, but they're going to make it work the first time. So we can legislate all we want, and as good or bad as this bill may be, ultimately, as long as we don't think like the bad guys, they're going to be a day and a step ahead of us every time.
Yeah, and just the sheer fact that there is legislation about this, legislation is always going to be a step behind, because it can't be on the cutting edge. That's just not how it works.
No, you were absolutely right about that. It cannot be. It can't really even reflect the cutting edge. It's reflective of the bumps and bruises and hard knocks we've taken until we finally have had enough, and let's pass a law about it. But there's a lot more work that's got to be done from here, a lot more, because now that this is done, one thinks that now that this law has passed, now the hard work begins, and that's where we're going to have to try to fix things and get things done. But there's going to be a lot of work out there for a lot of folks like our guys at Secure Ninja and Insight to work with companies and government agencies to actually figure out how to implement things to achieve the goals and objectives of the law by making their clients truly secure, and trying to achieve not just, well, the spirit, certainly, if not the actual letter of it. So there'll be a lot to do.
Right, and obviously this is going to be debate. This legislation was introduced last week, but it's going to be debated starting at the end of the month, and so there's going to be a lot more to talk about. And
absolutely there will be.
Obviously, this does affect pretty much everyone, so it's definitely something we need to be discussing on a regular basis. But,
well, it's like HIPAA. HIPAA affects not only the providers of the care, but it affects ultimately me and you, the patients. This law too, as you point out, it's going to affect the individual consumer in some way, shape, or form, because of the trickle-down effect that when the electrical utility has to do a certain thing, there's going to be a cent or two added to each individual subscriber's bill. Now, they can get all up in arms if they want to, but if it's required by the law, we're going to have to do that. But you're right, everybody is going to feel some sort of an impact from this.
Well, Ross, I really appreciate your time to kind of just scratch the surface a little bit on this. You know, like I said, this is well, it's new legislation, but it's not. I mean, I guess, you know, the fact that it was introduced last week means that this is a good kind of jumping off point for beginning the dialogue about the Cybersecurity Act. But yeah, there's so much more that we can discuss, and hopefully we can get some other people, some of the other ninjas, so to speak, involved to kind of discuss this. And,
well, it'll be very interesting to see how the debates go and what the points are that they're talking about. Because I think that those who watch the debates, those who pay attention to the outcomes, everybody's going to have something to say about this, because everybody's going to agree that this is a good thing to have. So they all want to go on record as having a say and being recorded on film that we're all in favor of America being more secure. But what's going to matter is what comes out in the way of meat, and what meat is left on the bones of this law after they've gone through all of that. We still have a long way, as you point out, having been introduced and having to start the debates and get debated on the floor. It has a long way to go before it truly becomes the law of the land, and it will be very interesting to see what form it will take at that point. It may not be 205 pages. It may be 2,000 pages. I mean, it may be 100 pages. Who knows? So watching it, yes, will be very interesting.
Well, thanks so much, Ross. I really appreciate having you on the show. And
it's been a real pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you.
All right. Well, Secure Ninja is always available to watch on YouTube. Just check out our channel at youtube.com/SecureNinja. If you'd prefer to have it delivered to you automatically via subscription in iTunes, just search for Secure Ninja. We have both the video, we also have an audio-only version that you can check out. Great for when you're commuting. And you can also find us at on our website, secureninja.com. Next week, I'm going to be spending the entire week at the RSA convention out in San Francisco. So we're going to be doing some interviews there, and hopefully we'll have some really interesting things to talk about on the show here. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of Secure Ninja is brought to you by SecureNinja.com, a world leader in information security and IT training and certification. Our master instructors will help build you into a highly skilled and marketable security professional. SecureNinja.com, forging IT security experts.